Last week, Charlie Kirk was murdered while speaking at Utah Valley University. His murder has shaken me pretty deeply. In the days after his assassination, when I would close my eyes, I just kept imagining a bullet going through a neck. You could feel the temperature rising.
These people need to be defeated, not reasoned with.
You have the crazies on the far left who are saying, oh, Stephen Miller and J.D. Vance, they're going to go after constitutionally protected speech. No, we're going to go after the NGO network that foments, facilitates, and engages in violence.
In my life, I don't think we have ever felt as close as we do now to some kind of violent national rupture. In the hours after Kirk's murder, trying to process my own shock, my own fear, I wrote a piece about him. In that piece, I said, you can disagree with virtually everything Kirk believed about politics. You can detest some of what he believed about politics and still believe that he was there on that stage, practicing politics the right way. Treated that disagreement as the beginning of a conversation rather than the end of one. I've published a lot of pieces over the years. I'm not sure I've published any with as polarizing reaction as that one.
That is Ezra Klein, a centrist liberal New York Times opinion writer.
There are a few vendors there that I wanted to support. And I was walking to try to get to the vendor, and I was stopped at a checkpoint. Checkpoints all through the city. The checkpoints obviously all through the West Bank. Your mobility is completely inhibited, and the mobility of the Palestinians is totally inhibited. And I was walking to the checkpoint, and an Israeli guard stepped out, probably about the age of my son. And he said to me, "What's your religion, bro?" And I said, "Well, I'm not really religious." And he said, "Come on, stop messing around. What is your religion?" I said, I'm not playing. I'm not really religious." And it became clear to me that unless I professed my religion and the right religion, I wasn't going to be allowed to walk forward. So he said, "Well, okay, so what was your parents' religion?" I said, "Well, they weren't that religious either." He says, what were your grandparents' religion?" And I said, "My grandmother was a Christian." And then he allowed me to pass. And it became very, very clear to me what was going on there. And I have to say, it was quite familiar. Again, I was in a territory where your mobility is inhibited, where your voting rights are inhibited, where your right to the water is inhibited, where your right to housing is inhibited, and it's all inhibited based on ethnicity.
Ta-Nehisi Coates, meanwhile, has checked Klein numerous times, and he will do so again.
Before he was killed last week, Charlie Kirk left a helpful compendium of words. Helpful compendium of words. Ones that would greatly aid those who sought to understand his legacy and import. It is somewhat difficult to match these words with the manner in which Kirk is presently being memorialized in mainstream stream discourse. New York Times columnist Ezra Klein dubbed Kirk one of the era's most effective practitioners of persuasion and a man who was practicing politics in exactly the right way. California Governor Gavin Newsom hailed Kirk's passion and commitment to debate, advising us to continue Kirk's work by engaging with each other across ideology through spirited discourse.
This is where I'll pick it up. Because in this piece by Coates for Vanity Fair, he continues by writing, it is not just, for instance, that Kirk held disagreeable views, it's that Kirk reveled in open bigotry. Claims of Kirk's civility are tough to square with his penchant for demeaning members of the LGBTQ plus community as, his words, freaks, and referring to trans people with the slur that Nancy Mace uses, and I will not. Faced with the prospect of a potential Kamala Harris presidency, Charlie Kirk would tell his audience that the threat must be averted because Kamala Harris wanted to, his words again, kidnap your child via the trans agenda. Garden variety transphobia is sadly unremarkable, wrote Coates. He would go over what we have previously. Kirk's attacks on black and brown people, including New York City mayoral candidate Zohran Mamdani, the religion of Islam, great replacement theory, the white supremacist conspiracy theory that white people are being replaced, black on black crime, but never mentioning white on white crime, that black folks target white people, which has no data whatsoever, running with the false claim that the exonerated five did it. They did not. his comments on Haiti, and more. He'd also say, per Coates' piece, Jewish donors were, again his words, the number one funding mechanism of radical open border, neoliberal, quasi-Marxist policies, cultural institutions, and nonprofits. That is insane and deeply anti-Semitic. Indeed, the philosophical foundation of anti-whiteness has been largely financed by Jewish donors in the country, he would say. I reiterate, deeply anti-Semitic. Coates would mention, once again, as you've seen right here, the history of Kirk's foundation, that being Turning Point USA, where one former staffer even texted that she hated all black people, and a former advisor published an essay stating black folks are socially incompatible with other races, and black culture is just a crime-ridden mess. At the University of Missouri, a local chapter would see its president, Meg Miller, joke of 3 black football players getting killed. She'd use a slur and then make another joke. Via Coates. The tragedy is personal, he wrote. Kirk was robbed of his life, and his children and family will forever live with the knowledge that a visual record of that robbery is just an internet search away. And the tragedy is national. Political violence ends conversation and invites war. Its rejection is paramount to a functioning democracy and a free society. Political violence is a virus, Klein would note. This assertion is true. It's also at odds with Kirk's own words. It's not that he merely, as Klein put it, defended the Second Amendment. It's that Charlie Kirk endorsed hurting people to advance his preferred policy outcomes. Exactly. As cited on another video, Kirk called for violence against Leah Thomas and stated men who don't stand in her way are weak and, in summary, to borrow their words, soy. At one point, he called for Joe Biden to be killed. He loves seeing federal troops in the nation's capital. Coates also, wisely, called out the double standards within the National Football League. Remember when they emblazoned "End Racism" past each end zone with that slogan? And then they took it down. And then they said there's no room for politics in sports. Yet they commemorate Charlie Kirk. And what are the writers, the thinkers, and the pundits who cannot separate the great crime of Kirk's death from the malignancy of his public life? Can they truly be so ignorant to the words of a man they have so rushed to memorialize? Coates asked. I don't know. But the most telling detail in Klein's column was that, for all his praise, there wasn't a single word in the piece from Kirk himself. See, that is what gets me. He's doing everything the right way. Usually when someone dies, you might put a quote from them. You know, you're going to show certain sides of them. And Coates is right. There wasn't a single quote from the man himself. He would end with this: words are not violence, nor are they powerless. Burying the truth of the Confederacy, rewriting its aims and ideas, and ignoring its animating words allowed for the terrorization of the black population, the imposition of apartheid, and the destruction of democracy. The rewriting and the ignoring were done not just by Confederates, but also by putative allies, for whom the reduction of black people to serfdom was the unfortunate price of white unity. The import of this history has never been clearer than in this moment when the hard questions must be asked. If you would look away from the words of Charlie Kirk, from what else would you look away? Powerful. Very, very, very powerful. And I will also add on this, as I've said many times over, no one should be killed because of an opinion or because of politics. That needs to be stated in every single video that we do, because it is not just the moral position, it is the right position. But what I won't do, and what others should not do, is whitewash an entire man's reputation because of a senseless act of violence. What really just gets me is the amount of people who suddenly came out of the woods and posted about this, yet they haven't said anything in the last year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. They've remained apolitical until this. And it strikes a chord with me because I have to believe that you just didn't really care, or you feel like you're forced to weigh in on something that you quite literally have no knowledge of because it goes against at least what I thought to be the moral, upstanding person that you were. So there's a lot of thoughts here, and I think we're showing why Ta-Nehisi Coates is one of the best because he puts it in ways that many of us simply can't.